A new world. The stars stretched out endlessly before Zach Armstrong as his spacecraft, the Odyssey, hurtled through the inky expanse of space. He was a seasoned explorer, having charted dozens of new worlds, but this sector was completely unknown. Zach thrilled at the prospect of discovery, of being the first human to lay eyes on a new planet teeming with alien life. Suddenly, alarms blared as the Odyssey shuddered violently. Red warning lights flashed across the control panel. System malfunction, the ship's AI intoned. Critical engine failure imminent. Zach frantically worked the controls, but it was no use. The ship was going down. Through the viewport, an alien planet loomed, its surface a swirl of purple and green. Bracing for impact, Zach gritted his teeth as the Odyssey plummeted through the atmosphere, smoke trailing behind it. The crash was brutal. The ship skidded across the planet's surface, leaving a scorched path in its wake before finally coming to a shuddering halt. Miraculously, Zach was alive, the ship's crumple zones having absorbed the worst of the impact. He stumbled out of the wreckage, his head pounding, and took in his surroundings. He found himself in a strange forest, the trees towering and tinted a deep violet. The air was breathable, rich with the scent of exotic flowers. In the distance, crystal spires glittered beneath an emerald sky. "You are trespassing, human." A voice rang out, melodic but stern. Zach spun to see a humanoid figure emerge from the undergrowth. She was tall and lithe, her skin a vivid shade of lavender. Silver hair cascaded down her back, and her eyes were a piercing amber. She wore a form-fitting suit of some metallic fabric, and there was an unmistakable air of authority about her. "I am Tyria, enforcer of the Zephyrian High Council," she declared. "You have violated our sovereign space. By our laws, you must come with me to face judgment." Zach held up his hands in a placating gesture. "My name is Zach Armstrong. I'm an explorer from Earth. My ship malfunctioned. I didn't intend to trespass." Tyria's expression remained impassive. "Intent is irrelevant. You will comply or face the consequences." She produced a sleek device from her belt, aiming it at Zach. He had no choice but to obey, following Tyria into the unknown, his heart heavy with trepidation. As they walked, Zach couldn't help but marvel at the alien beauty surrounding him. Bioluminescent flowers glowed softly, and strange creatures flitted through the underbrush. But the splendor was tainted by the gravity of his situation. He was a prisoner on an alien world, his fate uncertain, about to face an extraterrestrial tribunal for a crime he did not intend to commit. They emerged from the forest to a sight that took Zach's breath away. A city of gleaming towers rose before him, connected by graceful arching bridges. Vehicles that looked like glass bubbles zipped through the air, weaving between the spires. It was a vision of a highly advanced civilization, far beyond anything on Earth. Tyria led him to the tallest tower, a monolith of shimmering crystal. Inside, they ascended in a lift that moved so smoothly Zach scarcely felt it. The doors opened to reveal a cavernous chamber bathed in soft lavender light. Beings similar in appearance to Tyria lined the room, seated on hovering thrones. At the center was a raised dais, upon which sat a formidable-looking male with a crown of intricate metalwork upon his brow. "High Counselor Zahn," Tyria intoned, bowing deeply. "I bring before you the human trespasser." Zahn regarded Zach with piercing silver eyes. "Human, you stand accused of breaching our borders, a grievous crime under Zephyrian law. Have you anything to say in your defense?" Zach's mouth went dry. He was acutely aware that his next words could determine his fate. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward, meeting Zahn's gaze unflinchingly, ready to fight for his life in this strange new world. The ultimatum. Zach stood before the Zephyrian High Council, his heart pounding in his chest. High Counselor Zahn observed him with an inscrutable expression, his silver eyes seeming to bore into Zach's very soul. The other counselors watched with rapt attention, their faces a mix of curiosity and disdain. "Human Zach Armstrong," Zahn began, his voice resonating through the chamber. You have admitted to trespassing on Zephyria, a most serious offense. Normally, the punishment for such a transgression is death. A chill ran down Zack's spine. Death? For an unintended crash landing. He opened his mouth to protest, but Zahn silenced him with a raised hand. However, the High Counselor continued, "Given the circumstances of your arrival, the Council has decided to offer you a choice." Zack's brow furrowed. A choice? What could they possibly offer that would be preferable to execution? Zahn gestured to Tyria, who stood at attention beside Zack. "Enforcer Tyria has volunteered to take you as her mate. If you agree to this union, your life will be spared, and you will be granted permanent residence on Zephyria." Shock rippled through Zack. Marriage. To an alien. His mind reeled at the implications. "And if I refuse?" he asked, his voice tight. Zahn's expression hardened. "Then you will be executed immediately, as per our laws." Zack's heart sank. It was an impossible choice. Marry a complete stranger, an alien no less, or face certain death. He looked to Tyria, trying to read her expression, but her face remained impassive. "I need time to think," Zack said, his voice strained. Zahn shook his head. "The decision must be made now, human. Life with Tyria, or death. What is your choice?" Zack closed his eyes, his mind racing. He thought of Earth, of his family and friends, of all he would be leaving behind. But he also thought of all he had yet to explore, of the wonders and secrets of the universe still waiting to be discovered. In the end, there was only one choice he could make. "I choose life," he said, his voice clear and steady despite the turmoil within him. "I will marry Tyria." A murmur ran through the council. Zahn nodded, seeming satisfied. "Very well. The ceremony will take place immediately." Zack barely had time to process what was happening before he was whisked away to a small antechamber. Attendants swarmed around him, draping him in flowing robes of shimmering fabric. They spoke to him in their melodic language, but Zack understood none of it, his mind still reeling from the ultimatum. He was led to a grand hall, where the entire council had gathered. Tyria stood at the far end, resplendent in a gown of deep purple, her silver hair intricately braided with glowing gems. Zack walked towards her as if in a dream, scarcely believing this was happening. The ceremony itself was short but strange, full of alien rituals and phrases Zack couldn't comprehend. He and Tyria clasped hands, and a glowing cord was wrapped around their joined wrists as Zahn recited what Zack assumed were vows in the Zephyrian tongue. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. He was married. To an alien. On a world far from his own. As the reality of his new life began to sink in, Zack couldn't help but wonder what challenges and surprises lay ahead, and whether he had the strength to face them. Tyria led him out of the grand hall, her hand still clasped in his. She guided him through the winding corridors of the tower, finally stopping before a set of ornate doors. With a wave of her hand, the doors slid open, revealing a lavish suite. "These are our quarters," Tyria said, her voice softening for the first time since Zack had met her. "I know this must be overwhelming for you, Zack, but I promise I will do my best to help you adjust to your new life here." Zack managed a nod, his throat tight with emotion. As he stepped over the threshold into his new home, he couldn't shake the feeling that his greatest adventure and his greatest challenge was just beginning. Life on Zephyria. Zack awoke to the soft glow of Zephyria's twin suns filtering through the translucent walls of his and Tyria's shared quarters. For a moment, he almost believed he was back on Earth, that the events of the past day had been nothing more than a bizarre dream. But as his eyes adjusted to the ethereal light, and he took in the alien architecture surrounding him, reality came crashing back. He was married to Tyria, an alien enforcer on a planet he knew nothing about. The thought sent a wave of panic through him, and he sat up abruptly, his heart racing. "Good morning, Zack." Tyria's voice was gentle as she entered from an adjoining room. She was dressed in a simple tunic and pants, her silver hair flowing loosely down her back. "I trust you slept well." Zack managed a nod, not quite trusting his voice. He had been so exhausted from the events of the previous day that he had fallen into a deep, dreamless sleep almost as soon as his head hit the pillow. Tyria seemed to sense his unease. "I know this must be a lot to take in," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "But I meant what I said yesterday. I'm here to help you adjust, and part of that means teaching you about our world." She stood, offering him her hand. "Come, let me show you Zephyria." Zack hesitated for only a moment before taking her hand and allowing himself to be led out of their quarters and into the crystalline corridors of the tower. As they walked, Tyria explained the workings of Zephyrian society, how the planet was governed by the High Council, and how each citizen had a specific role to play. "What's your role?" Zack asked, curious despite himself. "I am an enforcer," Tyria explained. "It's my job to ensure our laws are upheld and our borders secure. That's why I was the one to find you when you crashed." She led him to a balcony overlooking the city. Zack's breath caught in his throat at the sight. The city stretched out before him, a glittering expanse of spires and arches, with vehicles zipping through the air between the buildings. In the distance, he could see lush green forests and glimmering lakes, a stark contrast to the urban landscape. "It's beautiful," he murmured. Tyria smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her amber eyes. "It is, and there's so much more to see." Over the next few days, Tyria took Zack on a tour of the city and its surroundings. She showed him the great libraries, where the Zephyrians stored their vast knowledge, the gardens where they grew their food, and the labs where they conducted their scientific research. Zack was astounded by the level of technology he saw, far beyond anything on Earth. "How is all this possible?" he asked, watching in awe as a scientist manipulated a holographic model of what appeared to be a complex molecule. "We've had a lot more time to develop," Tyria explained. "Zephyria has been a peaceful, unified world for millennia. That's allowed us to focus on science, art, and exploration rather than conflict." As the days turned into weeks, Zack found himself growing more and more comfortable in his new life. He was learning the Zephyrian language, thanks to Tyria's patient tutelage, and he was even starting to make friends among the other Zephyrians he met. But there was still so much he didn't understand, so much that Tyria seemed hesitant to explain. Like why the High Council had been so quick to offer him marriage instead of execution, or what role they expected him to play in their society. He tried to ask Tyria about it one evening as they were preparing for bed. "Tyria, I'm grateful for everything you've done for me," he began, "but I can't help feeling like there's something you're not telling me. Why did you really agree to marry me?" Tyria stiffened, her expression guarded. "Zack, you have to understand, there are some things I'm not at liberty to discuss. Not yet. Please, just trust that I have your best interests at heart." Zack wanted to push further, but the look in Tyria's eyes stopped him. There was a depth of sadness there, a hint of a burden that he couldn't begin to understand. So he simply nodded, letting the matter drop for now. But as he lay awake that night, staring at the alien constellations through the transparent ceiling, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was a deeper mystery at play, one that could change everything he thought he knew about his new life on Zephyria. A terrible truth. Zack stood in the great library, a massive repository of Zephyrian knowledge, staring at the holographic display in front of him with growing horror. He had come here seeking answers, trying to understand the mystery that Tyria seemed so reluctant to discuss. What he found shook him to his core. The display showed a graph, a line plummeting sharply toward zero. Next to it, Zephyrian text scrolled by, but Zack had learned enough of the language to understand the gist. Zephyria was dying. Its population was plummeting, its genetic diversity dangerously low. They were facing extinction. Suddenly, so many things started to make sense. The Council's eagerness to have him marry Tyria, their interest in his biology, the furtive looks and whispered conversations he sometimes noticed among the Zephyrians. They needed him, or more specifically, they needed his genes. Anger and betrayal surged through him. All this time, he thought Tyria had married him out of kindness, to save him from execution. But the truth was far more sinister. He was nothing more than a means to an end, a way for the Zephyrians to access the genetic diversity they so desperately needed. He stormed out of the library, his heart pounding, his mind racing. He needed to confront Tyria, to demand the truth. He found her in their quarters, staring out at the city with a pensive expression. "When were you going to tell me?" he demanded, his voice shaking with rage and hurt. Tyria turned, her eyes widening at his tone. "Zach, what are you talking about? I know about Zephyria's problem. I know you're dying out. And I know that's why you really married me. For my genes." Tyria's face fell, a look of deep sorrow etching itself into her features. "Zach, I wanted to tell you, but I was forbidden. The council thought it would be easier if you didn't know." "Easier for who?" Zach snapped. "Do you have any idea how this makes me feel? To know that my entire life here has been a lie." "It hasn't been a lie," Tyria said softly. "My feelings for you, the time we spent together, that's all been real." "But it started with a lie," Zach countered. "You married me under false pretenses. You used me." Tyria looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "You're right," she whispered. "What we did to you was wrong. But Zach, try to understand. We're desperate. We've tried everything to solve this problem on our own, but nothing has worked. You were our last hope." Zach felt his anger draining away, replaced by a deep weariness. "So what happens now?" he asked. "What do you want from me?" Tyria hesitated. "The council, they want you to provide genetic material. For our gene banks, and for me to bear your child." Zach recoiled, as if he'd been slapped. "A child? Tyria, I can't. Not like this. Not when everything between us has been built on a foundation of lies." Tyria nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I understand. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you." Zach turned away, unable to bear the sight of her pain, even in the face of his own betrayal. He walked out onto the balcony, staring out at the city he had come to love, now tainted by the knowledge of its dark secret. He had a decision to make, he realized. He could leave Zephyria, go back to Earth. The human solution. Zach stood on the balcony for a long time, his mind churning with conflicting emotions. Anger, betrayal, sadness, but also a growing sense of determination. He couldn't just leave Zephyria to its fate, no matter how much he had been hurt. It wasn't in his nature to turn his back on those in need, even if they had wronged him. He turned back to Tyria, who was watching him with a mix of hope and fear in her eyes. "I'll help," he said quietly. "Not in the way the council wants, but in my own way. I have an idea." Tyria's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Zach took a deep breath. "On Earth, we have scientists, doctors, people who specialize in solving genetic problems. If I can get in touch with them, maybe they can find a way to help Zephyria." Tyria looked skeptical. "Zach, we've had our best minds working on this for years. What makes you think your people could do better?" "Because they'll be coming at it from a different angle," Zach explained. "They'll have knowledge and techniques that your scientists don't. It's worth a try." Tyria was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. "All right. What do you need?" Over the next few days, Zach worked feverishly to establish contact with Earth. It wasn't easy, given the vast distances involved and the differences in technology, but he was determined. With Tyria's help, he was able to boost his ship's communication array, sending out a targeted message towards his home planet. "This is Zach Armstrong, commander of the Odyssey," he said, his voice shaking slightly as he recorded the message. "I am currently on the planet Zephyria, in need of assistance. The Zephyrians are facing a genetic crisis that threatens their entire species. I am requesting a team of our best geneticists and doctors to come to Zephyria and assist in finding a solution. Please, they need our help." He sent the message, then settled in to wait, hoping against hope that it would be received and understood. Days turned into weeks with no response, and Zack began to fear the worst. Had his message been lost in the vastness of space? Or worse, had Earth received it and chosen not to respond? Just as he was beginning to lose hope, a miracle happened. Zephyria's long-range sensors picked up a ship approaching the planet, a ship that matched the configuration of an Earth vessel. Zack's heart soared as he watched it land. A team of scientists and doctors disembarking, their faces filled with awe and excitement at the prospect of setting foot on an alien world. Over the next few months, the Earth team worked closely with Zephyrian scientists, poring over genetic data, running simulations, and conducting experiments. Zack acted as a liaison between the two groups, his understanding of both cultures proving invaluable. It wasn't easy. There were misunderstandings, cultural clashes, moments of frustration on both sides. But slowly, steadily, progress was made. The human doctors introduced new techniques for genetic manipulation, while the Zephyrian scientists provided insight into their unique biology. And then, finally, a breakthrough. A way to introduce new genetic diversity into the Zephyrian population to repair the damage done by centuries of isolation. It would take time, and it wouldn't be easy, but it was a start. Zack watched as the first treatments were administered, as hope began to dawn on the faces of the Zephyrians. Tyria was by his side, her hand clasped tightly in his. "You did this," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved us." Zack shook his head. "We did this," he corrected. "Humans and Zephyrians working together. That's what saved you." Zack shook his head. "We did this," he corrected. "Humans and Zephyrians working together. That's what saved you." And as he looked out over the city, at the alien world that had become his home, Zack felt a sense of pride and purpose unlike anything he had ever known. He had come here by accident, but perhaps it had been fate all along. A chance for him to make a difference, to show the strength and compassion of the human spirit, even in the face of the unknown. A new beginning. The day of the ceremony dawned bright and clear, the twin suns of Zephyria casting a golden glow over the city. Zack stood in front of the mirror in his quarters, adjusting the collar of his formal Zephyrian robes. They were a deep, rich blue, embroidered with silver thread in intricate patterns. Tyria had told him they represented wisdom and compassion, the two qualities most prized in Zephyrian culture. There was a soft knock at the door, and Tyria entered. She was resplendent in a gown of shimmering lavender, her silver hair braided with glowing crystals. She smiled when she saw Zack, her amber eyes warm with affection. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. Zack took a deep breath and nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." Together, they made their way to the great hall, where the entire city seemed to have gathered. The hall was adorned with glowing orbs that floated in the air, casting a soft, ethereal light. At the far end, the High Council stood on a raised dais, their faces solemn but proud. As Zack and Tyria approached, the crowd parted, a hush falling over the assembled Zephyrians. Zack could feel their eyes on him, but for once, he didn't feel like an outsider. He felt like one of them. High Counselor Zahn stepped forward, his silver robes glinting in the light. "Zack Armstrong of Earth," he said, his voice ringing out across the hall. "You came to us as a stranger, but you have proven yourself a true friend to Zephyria. Through your wisdom, your compassion, and your unwavering determination, you have given us the greatest gift of all, a future." A cheer went up from the crowd, and Zack felt a lump form in his throat. He glanced at Tyria, who was beaming at him with pride and love. "In recognition of your service," Zahn continued, "we hereby name you an honorary member of the Zephyrian people. From this day forward, you are one of us in every way that matters." He placed a hand on Zack's shoulder, and Zack felt a surge of emotion. acceptance, belonging, home. The ceremony continued, a blur of music and laughter and joy. Zack found himself swept up in the celebration, shaking hands and accepting hugs from Zephyrians he had come to know and love over the past months. But through it all, his thoughts kept returning to Tyria, to the woman who had started as his captor, become his teacher and friend. And now, he realized, held his heart. He found her on the balcony, staring out at the city with a contemplative expression. She turned as he approached, a soft smile on her lips. "Zack," she said, "I was just thinking about how much has changed since you first came here. How much I've changed." Zack nodded, moving to stand beside her. "I've changed too," he admitted. "Being here, being with you, it's given me a new perspective. On life, on love, on everything." Tyria turned to face him fully, her eyes searching his. "Zack, I know our marriage started as a political arrangement, but over these past months, I've come to care for you deeply. I love you." Zack's heart swelled, a fierce, wonderful ache in his chest. "I love you too, Tyria, more than I ever thought possible." He drew her into his arms, their lips meeting in a kiss that felt like a promise of a future together, here on this wondrous, alien world that had become their home. As the twin suns set over Zephyria, casting the city in a rosy glow, Zack knew that his journey had only just begun. There would be challenges ahead, obstacles to overcome. But with Tyria by his side, and with the strength and ingenuity of the human spirit, he knew they could face anything. Together, they would build a new life, a new world, a testament to the power of love, of unity, and of the unbreakable bond between two souls, no matter how different they might seem. It was a new beginning, and Zack couldn't wait to see where it would lead.